Beto is a surfer, is his first identity that I came aware of, who has been to South Africa as an environmental philanthropist from the Marisla Foundation. Daniel is an award-winning marine scientist and the originator of the shifting baseline concept, which has been fascinating for me to learn about. And Marina is an author and community resilience practitioner who published the book, The Atlas of Disappearing Places. So thank you, all three of you. And Beto, I'm going to hand over to you to lead the conversation. I'm very grateful for all the curation in thinking about this.
Wonderful, Tamsin. Thanks so much. And first and foremost, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, let me just start by thanking Lady Cunningham and B2 Trust. What a joy to be here, and so glad that you've helped to bring this amazing group together. And what B2 Trust is doing in that incredible region of Western Cape Province is really, really amazing on health fronts, ecological fronts, essentially making the whole place healthy and watching out for the welfare of people and the ecology. And Tamsin, thank you for bringing us together. I know you really, really worked many, many hours to make this happen. So thank you so much for doing this. And to the Resilience Funders Network and Impact Trust, we know you have a lot of stuff going on, and it all revolves around helping the planet and us people meeting the challenges that are coming down the pike due to various issues. And I want to echo what Lady Cunningham said for thanking Nikki and Cheetah Plains, because you really picked a fantastic charity to support. And of course, the gift that you're offering for the auction is just out of this world. So I also echo Lady Cunningham. You all should check it out because it is amazing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I wish we were all in person, because I can even through the Zoom, I feel kind of a special feeling of, someone flashed the peace sign earlier. It's a feeling of peace, and everybody on this Zoom is doing what they can to make the world a better place, and I can even feel it through the Zoom. So thank you all for joining. So today, the topic of the day is conserving islands of coherence in oceans of uncertainty, and that it's super appropriate because the world is, as you don't have to have me tell you, but the world's in turmoil on so many fronts, from human welfare to the environment, and, even to the point of extinctions of species, plants and animals. It's going faster than ever. And, in the blink of an eye, species are disappearing. And we have a crisis on our hands. And so that's why we call this, conserving islands of coherence in oceans of uncertainty. And that's what we're working on and trying to make happen. And you'll hear today about some successes. So to give you, a hint about these extinctions, if you can imagine, what's causing these is, it's a bunch of causes. It's habitat destruction, it's over-harvesting, whether it's fish or animals or timber. It's the spread of non-native species, the spread of disease, and also this little thing that you all know about called climate change. So all of that conspires to wreak havoc for people and nature. And one of the effects is major extinctions. So there are various ways to slow this down and get back to a sustainable path. And one is to protect specific areas of biodiversity and places that are important for the functioning of our ecosystems. And you can do that by protecting wildlife areas on water or land, and also protecting what we call wildlife corridors, which they're doing so well in the Roberg Coastal Corridor in near Plettenberg Bay. And it's really important to do these things. These corridors are totally essential if we're going to save nature and help the welfare of people, because what do? What's so good about these corridors? It helps with seed dispersal, pollination, predator-prey interactions, and this little thing of helping species find mates to preserve genetic diversity. So they're very, very important, but it ain't that easy to do. And today we're going to talk to two people who are working extremely hard to make that happen, to conserve islands of coherence in these oceans of chaos, you'd say. Our two speakers today are really, really noted fighters for people and the environment. Marina Psaros is a climate change planner, author, and advisor. She's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and is the co-author of the Atlas of Disappearing Places, Our Coasts and Oceans in the Climate Crisis. Her mission is to unite science, creativity, and technology to solve our most pressing environmental issues. So, Marina, we're super happy you're here. We also have with us a very good friend, longtime friend of mine, and the most esteemed marine and fisheries scientist in the world, Dr. Daniel Pauly. He's also a professor at the University of British Columbia. He is the scientist who governments and NGOs lean on when they have to have very, very good expertise on marine science or conservation of the oceans and lands. He's got expertise on so many things. This little thing, he's the most cited marine scientist in the world. So I'm super happy he's here. And just to give a plug not only to Marina's book, The Atlas of Disappearing Places, which is so important, a great addition to our education. And then Daniel has a long list of really wonderful, important books, just a list of a few: Vanishing Fish, Shifting Baselines and the Future of Global Fisheries. Another book is In a Perfect Ocean. Another great book, 5 Easy Pieces on how we can go about saving places. And then his really most amazing autobiography, which I hope you all get a chance to read.
Not autobiography, biography.
Biography, thank you.
Not
Thanks,
auto.
Daniel. The Ocean's Whistleblower. And it really talks a lot about Daniel's extraordinary life. So let's get started. To kind of set the stage, and how I would put it is, set the stage and give us a picture of how did we get here anyway? Everybody on this Zoom, we're fighting for, to get the planet on a sustainable path. But we can see all around us these oceans of incoherence. And so the question, how the heck did that happen? And so Daniel is going to set the table for us and give us a little overview of how we got here. And then I'm going to turn it over to Marina, who will give us an overview of her amazing work and how you get communities involved in reaching out for solutions and implementing solutions. So, Daniel, why don't you take it away?
Yeah. Good morning. And yeah, it is 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning here. I cut through the preliminary. I thank you all. And I must apologize in advance for not getting local details about we'll give you the big picture. It's a picture that the pieces, but when you assemble them, you get an idea of humans as an invasive species. And that's what we want to do something about. This invasive species, you all know that, emerged in Africa in about 300,000 years ago. And about 70,000 years ago, a group of about 1,000 people were pissed off with the local authorities and left Africa. And these people became the ancestors of all non-African. This is bizarre because it is what genetics shows, and lots of people have lots of problem with it. But this is what genetics shows now, that all non-African, all sub-Saharan African, non-African, well, whatever, developed out of all non-African, developed out of about 1,000 people who left Africa about 70,000 years ago. And they moved across the Red Sea, probably, and into what is now Yemen. And from there they turned back up to toward Europe and into Asia, and later into the Americas and into Polynesia and the Pacific. All continents were peopled except Antarctica. This peopling went along with the destruction of basically the biggest mammals on every continent. In North America, for example, about 30 to 40 genera of large animals were killed and exterminated, ranging from mammoth, everybody knows that, to horses. There were no horses. They evolved in North America, but they were extinct by the time the Spaniard and first landed in America. In Asia, they also wiped out lots of animals, and in fact, the modern humans wipe out also the fauna of Australia, the marsupial. They were marsupial rhinos and marsupial elephant equivalent, and they were all wiped out. What we have is a reduced biodiversity, and that has continued nearly to the present. About 10,000 years ago, we invented, and this didn't start at any given point, but at various points in various continents, we invented agriculture about 10,000 years ago, plus minus 5,000 years in different continents. And the result of this was obviously a boom in population, human population, but an enormous reduction of animal biodiversity and also plant biodiversity, because we preferred a few plants, rice and wheat and barley and corn and potato, and other plants were wiped out or declined. In fact, there are quite a few plants that have gone extinct. So the plant, the overgrazing is and desertification is also a result of agriculture, and desertification is going on now at present. There is several hundred hectares being lost per day in different countries of the world, and that has a rate that has not declined. Desertification is a result of overgrazing or agriculture and irrigation, and this goes on now. Now, let's go to Europe. In Europe, Christianism spread, and Christianism had this weird notion that you should not eat meat on Fridays, and it expanded to Sundays, to about 130 days a year that no meat could be eaten. This led to fish being very important, and Europe developed a variety of fishing techniques which had not been developed elsewhere, like trawling, behind a sailboat that was invented in 1400 something. And these methods then were globalized with the ascent of the open expansion that began with the voyage of discovery of the Spaniards and Portuguese. So we have now an expansion of fishing, which modified the way fishing, artisanal fishing, or by native people in different parts of the world was conducted. But the big breakthrough is the ascent, well, of the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution is important because it replaced the sun energy from one season that produced the wheat and the grain that we eat, and produce the wind that pushes boats, by the accumulated energy that you find in coal and later in petroleum. So basically, humans could deploy energy, not the bit that you gather from plants, the growth of last year, but the bit that it has been accumulated for millions of years in that is found in lump of coal. And the boats, the first steel vessel that used this fossil energy were trawlers, and they were modified warships. In 1880, Britain developed and fielded the first steam trawlers that operated around the coast of the British Isles. And within a decade or so, they had emptied these waters, and they had to fish elsewhere. And this is a mark of our period, because fisheries are forever expanding in space. Specifically, the British vessels ended up in Iceland, where they participate. They are now modified to diesel engine and not steam engine, participated in a war that, the Cod War, that involved the Icelanders that wanted to throw out the British vessels that were fishing in their water. And an important characteristic of these vessels and of the 20th century's fishing vessel is that they were all developed as instrument or based on technology that was developed to fight German submarines. In Europe, the two World War had a structure that was similar in that Germany was isolated by mining the North Sea and other waters, and Germany then put lots of its energy into submarine warfare. And submarine warfare is fought by finding something that is underwater and catching it or interacting with it. Let's call it like that. And the techniques that are used for catching fish are all adapted from that. That involves hydroacoustic, that involves better navigation, a precise navigation such as provided by satellite, and that involves spotting airplanes that come from boats that have airplane on them and that go around finding submarines or boats. The Bismarck, the famous Bismarck, the vessel was sunk by the British fleet after it was found by a spotter plane. Spotter plane are used to catch tuna or to identify tuna. So what we have now is the application of heavy technology, heavy industry on fighting fish. And we are, for all purposes, fighting a war against fish. Obviously, we win it obviously we win it because of the application of something that evolution has not prepared fish for. A school of fish, for example, can withstand the attacks of a bunch of whales, because the whales lunge at a school of fish and is blocked by its mouth, by its own mouth that opens up, and so the whales spend a lot of the energy moving after school, being stopped by the water that resists them, and being able to grab a few mouthful of fish or krill or whatever it is that from schools that then escapes them, and they cannot follow them. We can actually follow them, and we can actually grab the entire school in one go. And the techniques that fish had evolved to escape predators don't work. In fact, they contribute to the fish being caught, like the defense of musk ox, I don't know the name in English, that form a ring of defense against wolves, and that makes them easier to kill. So basically, we have a situation where we have been extremely successful at colonizing the world, annihilating everything that could be maybe representing an obstacle or a prey, annihilating everything that we could, and finding ourselves with enormous population that now depends on the continuous supply of this product that we don't produce, that nature produces. And fisheries are different from agriculture and manufacturing, obviously, in that they don't require any input to produce fish. Nature produces them, but then the amount of fish that can come out of that system is limited by nature itself. So we can catch everything, but then we won't have anything left, or we can moderate our take, and we can have what my colleague Rashid Soumala called infinity fish. We can make more money out of sardines than out of diamonds, which don't last forever, because you can find a diamond only once. The sardine grow forever if you maintain them. But humanity has as a whole not learned sustainability. We are not, obviously, the environment movement, the people who are I guess, we are all interested in sustainability. We would like the biodiversity around us to be maintained, but the public at large doesn't get it, and this is the problem that we face, because sustainability has to be invented as a collective thing that humanity needs, and we're all trying, and we propose corridors and marine protected areas, and some of these things translate because people love parks, they love greenery around them, they love animals to be running around, but the demand in terms of food and a constant supply contradict this liking of nature and this liking of animals running around. And it is for us to paint a picture and to make a case that will change our culture profoundly, because sustainability has not been invented yet, has not been as a value that should pervade all of society, just like honesty does. For example, nowhere can somebody brag about being a thief, but you can brag about being a hunter, and you can brag being a fisher who exceed a quota that will not lead to any moral assessment in the same way that bragging about being a thief would. So we have a job, a big job on our hands, and I hope we make it. And in this corridor example that has been presented by Annabelle, we have one case where we can halt this machine and showcase that it does something if we do that. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was great, Daniel. So you painted, for all of us, you went through thousands of years of history in 20 minutes. And it's really, really fascinating to hear, like we said at the beginning, how did we get here anyway? And Daniel was the person who figured out this idea, this concept of shifting baselines, which, if you go and you look at pictures of fishermen 100 years ago, they're very happy that they caught a tuna fish that's 10 feet long or 15 feet long. And they're very happy, they're smiling. And then if you go to 50 years ago, another fisherman is holding a tuna fish that's 7 feet long, and he's very, very happy and smiling. And then if you go to 20 years ago, it's 4 feet long, but the fisherman's still happy. The point being, no one remembers really what it was like. And so if you catch, finally in the Mediterranean, I think they're catching 1 or 2 foot tuna fish, and didn't used to be like that, but still people are happy to get that little tiny tuna fish. And that's the shifting baseline. Daniel, thanks. So we're going to come back for questions a little bit later for Daniel and Marina, but now we're going to turn to Marina Psaros. And Marina, it's so good to have you here. Marina has written a really, really influential book called the Atlas of Disappearing Places, which talks about the effects of climate change, especially on special places, biodiversity, and people. And so one more time, we'll have time for Q&A. But first of all, I hope, Marina, you can give us a little overview of your book and what you learned, and then the insights and wisdom you've gained. And then we will turn it to questions and answers. So Marina, over to you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me to come into this conversation, Tamsin. It was really grateful when you reached out to me, and I'm just so excited to be able to be a part of this conversation. I am actually going to have to turn off my camera for a minute. I have a visual disability, and it's conflicting with my screen reader right now, my camera. But I will have a consolation prize. Instead of looking at my face, I actually have some visuals from my book. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of the book itself and sort of how I've been doing my work. If you can get onto that. Okay, cool. I see at least one person on, so can just, enjoy the visuals while I give a short introduction, and then I'll see if I can deal with my whole setup here. So I wrote this book, The Atlas of Disappearing Places, after spending about a decade working on community-level coastal planning. I worked for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and had been doing a lot of work in translating the science that was being generated from NOAA and NASA and some of the big federal agencies to the level of local decision-making in coastal areas. So near shore, urban, wildlife corridors. This was the type of work that I had been doing. And what I was seeing over and over again in my work was that the average person who, many of whom live actually at the coast, are not really connected to that world of coastal science and policy and management experts. They are not coastal geomorphologists with PhDs. They're not up on the latest global climate models. So they have, at best, a vague understanding of how the Pauly crisis will impact their own lives. And if most of the folks are thinking about this issue at all, it's with a sense of, dread and overwhelm and grief and loss. And these are really uncomfortable feelings. So obviously, they try and get out of those uncomfortable feelings of grief and overwhelm as fast as possible by thinking about something else. But that's not actually helpful. Ignoring what's going on around us isn't going to fix the problem. And in a place like where I've done a lot of my work in California, what the everyday person thinks and how they act has an incredible influence on outcomes. In California, we vote all the time. It's one of our favorite activities. Some believe that we don't do this very well, but whatever. And we vote on all kinds of things like whether or not we will have infrastructure to protect our coastlines, whether or not we're going to have seawalls, if we'll tax ourselves, right? So what the average person thinks is actually incredibly important to whether or not we're able to adapt and be resilient. So I wanted to create something that would offer everyday people a way into this conversation about our future and have it be accessible to non-experts and give people a sense of their own agency. We do have a lot of power in the networks in which we operate personally and professionally, the things that we extract, what we buy, like we do have a lot of agency with many of the aspects of the Pauly crisis. And so I wanted this, thing to be beautiful, this book to be beautiful, and to have different ways for people to explore these really scary topics. So each chapter has some science, and it's laid out in as accessible language as possible. And as you can see, there's these incredibly beautiful illustrations. Each chapter has a sort of focusing keyword and quote, and then a really short piece of speculative fiction. And that speculative fiction is set in the year 2050. My co-author and I chose that year because it's close enough that most of our readers, and hopefully me, will still be alive. And that means that you can feel a connection to that story. And also, at that same time, it underscores the urgency of acting now. And so throughout the book, we've woven an allegory of illness and health and recovery and resilience in the form of thinking about bodies and how they change over time, how they can be resilient, where we reach breaking points, what is illness? Because I think that we are so familiar with our own bodies. We know how they function, we live in them. And so thinking of the rest of the world also as embodied is one way to build empathy. So I hope that you've noticed these absolutely gorgeous illustrations. My co-author, Christina Conklin, is an artist, and she painted all these images in the book. Some of them are, like whimsical little creatures, and others are very creative visualizations of scientific data. That first one is Pine Island Glacier in the Antarctic, and what Christina has shown here is the speed of Arctic ice melt. And, obviously red is faster, also sign of danger. And so, again, it's a way to think about a topic that most people don't feel comfortable engaging with, which is like a hardcore advanced climate science, and putting it in something that's beautiful, which is, a painting. And Christina did all of them on seaweed. So she actually harvested seaweed, dried it out, pounded it flat, and then painted on it. And so actually, if she were to spill something on on that seaweed, the images would vanish. And so that's also another allegory of how transient our lives are on this world. And so the book is structured more or less on the same framework that I use in community engagement, which is using evocative data visualization and place-based storytelling to put everyday people at the center of their own experience of climate change and of other aspects of the Pauly crisis. And then orienting those conversations towards solutions that they can see themselves being a part of, because it's in a year that they understand, because it's in a place they know, because it's about the people and the experiences and the species that they love. So Beto, I know that we're going to kind of get into a little bit more of the conversation, so I'll just end there. That is pretty much the overview of the book. And I'm still dealing with my screen situation over here. So I'll be back with my face soon.
Well, thank you so much, Marina. That is a really, really good overview. And I encourage you all to get the book. It is amazing. And, you know, as Marina said, it's scary to deal with these topics, but I think most of us on this Zoom right now are dealing with this all the time and figuring out ways to cope and get the world on a better path. And this book is very helpful on that front. So Marina, thank you very much. So as I mentioned, we're going to go to questions and answers, but I have a question first for Marina, and then I'll have one more for Daniel. Then we'll open it up to all of you. So be ready. And when we do that, Tamsin, perhaps you can, being at the mothership there in the, you know, orbiting space, you've got control of everyone, so you can control the Q&A, I hope. But it's funny that the backdrop of this whole conversation right now, the destruction is really widespread in the Southeast United States. I just talked to a friend who lives in North Carolina, Asheville to be specific. The place is totally destroyed, and the roads in and out are closed. There's no cell service. It's really wiped out, and so that puts kind of an exclamation point on Marina's overview, and it adds to Daniel's point of how we humans are doing our part to help biodiversity disappear in various ways. So anyway, my first question is for Marina. Marina, you know, how have you involved community members in both the generation and dissemination of scientific knowledge? But, you know, I know you've done this, and you've done this kind of work in climate science, but given that B2 Trust in the region where they are, they focus not only on ecology, but also on health and welfare of people. So my question would be, you know, you've done this dissemination of scientific knowledge revolving around climate, but are there lessons that you could apply, for instance, to community health?
Yeah, I think so I mentioned this framework earlier of getting people centered in their own experience and then building agency and ownership of, you know, community that you're working with. And I see that as a co-creative process. And in the United States, I'm not sure actually what the planning process is like in South Africa, but in the US, there is a required component of public engagement that has made it actually really easy to do some of this work. It's required by law at the local level and at the national level on lands that are owned by public agencies. You must, you know, consult with the public on what's happening in those lands and with those resources. And so that is a great opportunity that's totally underutilized a lot of the time. And I think that we can co-create the laws that we have in the communities that we live in. And that planning can really happen like with people, whereas a lot of us feel like planning is happening like to people or at people or on people. So I always come back to my, you know, to my idea of co-creation and how we move into a framework of with as opposed to at or to. So one example is that framework is a formal education program that I created called Youth Exploring Sea Level Rise Science. And I did this when I was a part of the team that created the first geospatial decision support tool for the state of California. So it was a program, you know, again, NOAA, NASA, United States Geological Survey. It was a very science intensive process. It was a, you know, big group of really well-funded, amazing researchers who were downscaling global climate models for use by local government agencies to guide development and conservation planning. And it could have been your typical like big rigorous, cumbersome, expert-driven project. And I got a grant to create curricular resources for high school science students to get involved in that project so that it was no longer only driven by the experts. The curriculum started with traditional classroom learning about climate impacts. It was tied to next generation science standards, which is the US standard for basically how science is taught in the classroom. And tying it to standards made it easier for teachers to actually bring it into the classroom. So we had a lot of teachers who were able to take it in. And then what we did is we had students go out and do their own data collection. So they had two options for data collection. The first is that they could help us validate the projections that that research team was getting. So, for example, we had projections of what was going to be flooded by sea level rise, and we had students go out and actually validate those projections based on high tides. We had a couple of other areas where students were involved in actually like checking and kind of co-creating that science that was going to be driving the policy. The other option is that students could do community surveys and gather social science data, and that was around if people had experienced floods. A lot of it was actually sort of even opinion, like, do you think climate change is happening? Who do you think should be solving it? So really like social science. And what we didn't realize at the time that we had students going out and gathering this data was that, a lot of these students, especially in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, where I live, spoke languages other than English at home. So, in their communities. So even though we gave them this survey instrument in English, as they were doing their community surveys, they wound up translating, into Tagalog or Vietnamese or Korean and, other languages that they spoke at home. And then we got this data back about what all of these local level community folks were experiencing and thinking and feeling. And the results were way richer than what any government agency could get. There is absolutely no way that newcomer communities in California are going to be, answering honestly a bunch of like government-led questions. So it was a really like rich data set that we received. And then the final part after the classroom learning and the data collection was that students created their own capstone project detailing, what they'd learned, the data they collected, how it was being used by the scientists, what they thought should happen next in their community. And then we had these students deliver the results of their work at actual planning and policy meetings. And we had them then serve as advisors to the formal planning processes. And what was also great about that is that, of course, all of those parents wanted to see their students in action. So we got all the parents to show up at community meetings, and it wound up being a really positive and very unusual, at that time, approach to how to get a broader set of stakeholders in these types of meetings. And so I think that model of, working with youth, doing formal education in the classroom, having them act as community ambassadors, and then bringing them back into decision making is a model that can be used in other areas. Like right now, I'm using that same thing, classroom learning, data collection, tied to a real world planning process. I'm doing it with heat resilience. So we're working with chief heat officers in a couple of cities around the world who are looking at how to build heat resilience in their communities. And we're actually having students recreate their towns in Minecraft and then put their ideas for heat resilience, green roofs and shade corridors and, cooling centers, into these Minecraft builds. And then they compete with each other and they, they share their ideas with other cities who are also doing this work. And so I think that framework could probably translate pretty well to community health. There was a really cool project several years ago called Map Your World, and the documentary The Revolutionary Optimists, which was an undertaking with informal communities surrounding Calcutta, where youth organizers did their own data collection projects. And one of the outcomes of that was an incredibly successful polio vaccination campaign, because what the youth did was they mapped out where the polio vaccination clinics would be. And then, they're the ones who actually know the people who are living in these communities and were way better ambassadors for doing, like getting people actually to come in and get a vaccine than would have been the government agency. So I think that model may be one that could be replicated in other contexts.
That's fantastic, Marina. Thanks so much. Really, really insightful. I noticed that we have some very, very good and interesting questions coming from our audience here. And so before we jump into those, Daniel, do you have any insights on how we go about getting on this sustainable path? And I know you work at an international level, a national level, regional, and down to the local.
No,
Do you have some insights for us?
No, that I don't, because there is a price you have to pay if you work on a global basis, which I do. I try to, for example, correct the world catch that FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, gets, because they get from all countries, they get a submission annually of the catch that these countries make. Now, the group that I maintain called the Sea Rounders. This is homage to Rachel Carson's book. We correct that this data, because they are insufficient, because they don't include small-scale fishers, they don't include recreational fishers, they don't include subsistence fishers, many of them being women in the global south. And as soon as you start doing global stuff, you don't have you don't have local connection, because you cannot scale up local experiences such as described by Marina. You cannot. There are too many, and so my work tends to be superficial. I know lots of things about various things, but I don't know anything in detail at any locally. For example, I don't know much of what happens in BC where I live. So no, I cannot answer your question. But being there, I was in Cancun when Helen hit the ground, and it was a very interesting experience, because I have lived 20 years in the Philippines and survived lots of hurricanes. They call them typhoon there, and they kill people. But I wasn't. The housing, at least the modern housing, is well done. I was in a hotel for a conference in a landscape shaped completely by massive tourism, and these hotels have been built in like mushrooms, and they are very bad quality. And I was in a 10th floor, and when I woke up, I had 2 centimeters of water in my room on a 10th floor, and the water had come through the frame of the windows. And Cancun was not affected much, but there was water all over the place. But having water in your room is odd, and not only the bed was dry, and my computer was in the water, so my laptop was short, and I couldn't communicate for 2-3 days, and it was an interesting experience, I must say. So why I'm telling you this? Because this kind of thing makes you aware of what happens locally. But again, I tend to work on a global basis. I have also created a database for fish that is used by millions of people, called FishBase. But again, it is global. So please accept it is limitation. This is the price you pay for global stuff.
Daniel,
So,
I love that, because
if I may say, science is structured in a T way. There is horizontal stuff, the kind of stuff I do, that is superficial, and the local stuff that people do, that when you go in depth at a certain place with certain people about a certain topic. That's what Marina has explained. And these two things complement each other, and they both are needed. Yep.
I was laughing because I was thinking about how many times I have worked with folks who do the work that you do, right? I'm pretty sure that you're an ichthyologist, not a coastal geomorphologist, but or I'm assuming you're an ichthyologist. I think about that because I have worked with, I mean, that's how I have done that work. I'm absolutely that part of the T, and you're part of the T, and those two things do go well together. And what I've seen is that from a lot of the funding community, both federal and philanthropy, there is there's a lot of funding for the work that you do, Daniel. I'm so curious what you think about this. I see a lot more funding going towards that part and less going towards the horizontal part in community. And sometimes there'll be like an NSF, what's it called? The not the outreach, you know what I mean? The engagement. There's some part of NSF grants which you can always tell if the researcher was not thinking about that. They like shove it in at the end and it's a tiny part of the thing.
Marina, I have the opposite impression. That
Really?
lots of foundation fund local stuff which cannot be scaled up. That's the problem with local thing. You get good photo op. Now I'm being nasty, but I'm exaggerating. You get photo ops. You get you can see people with a big grin on their face because something has been fixed in their village or something.
Yeah.
But it doesn't scale. It doesn't scale, meaning that if you cannot do it millions of times because there is millions of villages, as in India, for example. So it's important to access government. With Oceana, Beto and I are member of the board of Oceana. We try to always link what we do with government officials, that because government are force multipliers to make something that has been done locally. For example, discovering a link between cancer and smoking, to force people to then to go along with no smoking in public places or something. You cannot do that privately. You cannot do that by scaling up local experience.
I'm curious what you think about. So that's a really great point, and I'm wondering what you think about like monitoring and evaluation, which is something that, at least in my experience, I don't see funded very often by the philanthropic community, and it's super not sexy. But for the work that you do, I would imagine that getting like funding and getting long-term support for monitoring and evaluation is incredibly important. Is that hard for you to do, or how do you see the funding around? Like,
it is only recently that the evaluation of development project, perhaps also ecological project, has become fashionable. Duflo got a Nobel Prize in Harvard because she developed techniques for evaluating whether intervention in India were working or not. And this is, you have to be hard-nosed about it, because lots of people, again, they do local work, helping a community, and then it has no effect whatsoever because it cannot be scaled. And she and her husband developed techniques for evaluating the scalability and the success of local project. And it is very hard because if you tell, well, this is good what you do, but it cannot be used, it cannot be widened, it has no general applicability. This is tough, I guess. And I don't know if it is sufficiently sufficiently funded.
I worry, I know that we're totally off topic from where we wanted to go, but I really now just want to say this last thing, which I was thinking about. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, so it's all tech money all the time, it feels like, right? There's a lot of venture capital, and venture wants to come in and commercialize and scale. And I think about, there's so much work going on now with IoT, like Internet of Things, and with sensors. And I think that may drive down the cost of doing some of that monitoring and evaluation work and could maybe also possibly get fed into larger data sets. But I worry about it because since it is venture money, it's necessarily looking for a profit and a return. And I worry about the creation of basically privately owned data sets that would inform how we operate in the future.
So I'm going to jump in now because we do have some really interesting questions from everybody on the Zoom. And Tamsin, do you want to read them from the chat? And I also want to say, Tamsin, don't be shy. I don't mind reading your very interesting question either. But how would you like to proceed?
Just before I can't get a word in edgeways, I thought I would quickly raise 3 questions in a row, if you don't mind, Beto,
Yeah, that's good.
And I think Daniel, and to this last point of the T and of horizontal and vertical, I see Tom raised a question on how do we make it diagonal. But to that point that you made, Daniel, and given the polycrisis and discontinuity and the fact that everything is going to become local, actually is the idea of scaling even one that in the face of the polycrisis is one we should be championing, or is it rather lesson learning from what happens locally that could be replicated in other areas? So I'm just going to ask all the questions in one go. So that's one to your point. And Marina, if you have any point on the diagonal. The other thing that I raised in the chat before I go to everybody else, because I'm just going down, is I was interested when Marina made the comment about what the average person thinks is what we do. And I was wondering how shifting baselines could apply in a social science context like that. Is there a different level of awareness that one is seeing in terms of the invasiveness of our species, if you like, and how does the work that both of you are doing in some way connect with something like the Robert Coastal Corridor or Plet Aid Foundation that is trying to build kind of integrated community environmental corridor spaces? And then Michael asked the question, how for you, Marina, which is translate, and I think you spoke to this, translating your insights into regenerative education for children and youth. So I think I can certainly put you and Michael in touch after this. But I think, Annabelle, that might also be very interesting for you in terms of the Beto Trust opportunity ideas with Robert Coastal Corridor and Plet Aid. So Marina, I think you might have seen that. And then Daniel, a question after my own heart, which is, how do corridors work in oceans where you can't control boundaries, which I think we had spoken about. And I think those are, if there's anybody else, please put your hand up because I haven't got a hand raised on my controls, but I don't know if Beto, that helps. I'll stop now.
That
Marina,
helps a lot.
or Daniel first?
So you've teed it up great, but did you mention your question, which I find very intriguing as well, is regarding shifting baselines? What is people's awareness about our invasiveness? That's really interesting. So I would just add that.
Yeah. If I may deal with the shifting baseline questions. So first of all, the shifting baseline was invented twice. The breakthrough or insight are actually often duplicated at the same time. And the same month and the same year, a paper was published by a group of sociologists working in Austin, Texas, or Dallas, or Fort Worth. I don't know which of them. I think it was Austin, with a group of disadvantaged kids that had never seen the starry sky. They had never seen the starry sky, and they thought that the sky did not involve star because they lived in a polluted area. And I have myself among my students, I had a Korean who had grown up in Seoul and never seen the starry sky either before he came here. And so these sociologists had invented exactly the same thing as a shifting baseline. They had given it the name generational amnesia, which is proper, correct, but somehow, and it happens in science, my version of it became successful and the other one less so. So it is, and the reason why this very successful, because shifting baseline, the concept, because it's suitable also to explain sociological phenomena. It is not limited to science. In fact, it is more limited to, it is in science, it is easier to counter because for example, we can reconstruct ancient temperatures, or we can reconstruct ancient glaciation or something, and that gives you a non-shifting baseline that gives you an anchor point. In human affairs, things can change and be undocumented, and so that there you have a shifting baseline that really shift because you don't even know how it was in the past. So a shifting baseline is a very important concept that works in other area. And now give me a hint. What was a specific question to that? Whether it works, Tamsin?
I think it was, wasn't it, Tamsin, go ahead and say it, how you put it.
I was wondering whether there was any evidence of shifting baseline with regard to
to the
social
invasiveness. Certainly, people don't know that, but we talk about rats all the time and German cockroach or something as invasive species, but we don't at all see that because we don't know that we move so much and we don't recall. Imagine the native movements in the US against immigrants. It's all professed by people who 2 generations ago were immigrants. In fact, Vance, his own wife, is the daughter of an immigrant. It's completely insane. And so, if people knew that their ancestors immigrated from Africa a few thousand years ago, obviously they would have a different feel about being nativist and being nationalist and being crazy right-wingers. That is the example of not being aware of us moving. The fact that immigrant communities don't even know that they are immigrant communities. They feel they've always been there. And in America, in the US, it's most pronounced. And they have been, the US inhabitants have been there 150 years before the First Nation were eliminated. It's absurd. It's really absurd. And obviously shifting baseline occurs there. Obviously.
Yams, and other questions that you see?
I can answer, or I have a thought on the diagonal question. If I think about ocean acidification, then there's a lot of evidence now in California. There's a lot of work that's being done on controlling ocean acidification in local areas. And there is at least, early days shows some success on decreasing acidity in, in certain areas around kind of near where I live. And that could be an exciting example of something that's happening at the local level. I have no idea whether and how it can translate up to it seems insane that it would translate up to an ocean-wide solution, but maybe it is something that can be implemented in other local areas, right? So where we see one island of coherence and one area of experimentation, what needs to happen is the dissemination of what worked in that area and whether or not it will work in another place. So it kind of, again, gets to what Daniel had pointed out, this tension between being able to be the, horizontal versus vertical, and what are those mechanisms that we have to get local success stories and, case studies that are working in one area into the hands of folks that are working in another area. By the way, I am not an ocean acidification expert. I have a dangerous level of knowledge on that. So, Daniel, I don't know if you have, worked much on.
Acidification is not my thing. But deoxygenation is.
Beto, sorry, I put the other two questions there. So how do corridors work in oceans where it's harder?
Oh, yes, that was the thing. So ocean have implicit corridors that are more open than on land. For example, a forest, it has difficulty moving. The forest should move north and south to poleward because the climate is changing such that they should move, and they do move, but they can be stopped by a road, an autobahn or a wide road can stop the spread of a forest to the north in the northern hemisphere, and vice versa. We don't have such barrier in the marine world. There are barriers in the marine world. It's not so that it is totally open, and it is wrong to think that fish can go anywhere. They cannot, because they are limited by temperature, by light, which produce food that can be consumed. So for example, when it's warm for them, they can go move poleward because the temperature is then not elevated, or they can move deeper where the water is also cooler. But deeper, they don't get enough food because the light cannot penetrate, and then there's no primary production. And also, deeper, there is often less oxygen. So there is a limit to which they can adapt, and the movement toward the pole is stronger than the movement deeper than the movement toward depth. So they are a barrier, but they are less strict, they're less efficient than on land. On land, a road can block the distribution, of animals very easily, and forest and vegetation on the equivalent of a road doesn't exist in the water. So
and then there's also the way that fisheries operate would be another set of boundaries on that, biotic mass, I would guess. So if you think about,
the problem with fisheries development is that what we see as progress in fisheries is the abolition of limits, the abolition of borders. So you read the literature 100 years ago, and there were places where the boats couldn't go because of ice, or couldn't go because of depth, or couldn't go because of cost or something. And basically subsidies, the building of big boats, the building of the development of technologies like huge winches on engine that on boats that allows a net to be retrieved from 1 kilometer depth. All of this has suppressed the barriers to fishing that existed. I remember in 1973 as a student, I was on a German vessel fishing in Labrador and Newfoundland at 1.5 kilometer depth. That had never been achieved before, fishing at 1.5 kilometer depth. And we retrieve tons of cod. Obviously, this was the time of the big cod fishery, but we retrieve rocks of the size of a Volkswagen. They were part of the catch in the net. And if you imagine that kind of power, it is no wonder that the cod was wiped out. It had been exploited 500 years by Europeans because they fished down to 50 meters depth with lines. and retrieve the cods that were coming toward the surface. But the cod that were 500 meters, they were completely immune. So they were the base of sustainability for that fishery. And it's like you before the industrial age, the banks were at tellers, and you could get the interest that was given to you on an annual basis. Now we could open the bank, break into the vault, and we can pillage the bank, that the money that is held there, and therefore the fishery collapsed within 30 years of trawlers being entered into the fishery. It collapsed. It had the first collapse in the 80s, and then the Canadian government excluded all the foreign vessels from Europe and built their own fleet that gave the fishery the rest. Imagine 500 years of fishing with lines, which skimmed the cod that were exposing themselves in shallow water, like getting money from your bank through a teller, and all of a sudden the treasure, the bank vaults are open, and you can pillage it with a truck. That is what happened in the 60s, the 70s, and that's what we do with everything now. We imagine a few hundred years ago, if you wanted to get a tree down, or this was an immense amount of work. And in fact, getting planks out of a tree was an immense amount of work. And so you could not destroy an old growth forest. But now we destroy old growth forests all the time.
The other way you've put it before, Daniel, is where we used to take the interest of nature.
That's right. That's what the teller gives you.
Timber, or we take the interest, but now we've taken the principle.
Yes.
Tamsin, we're heading for the
Top of the hour.
here, heading for the end, and so perhaps do you see one last burning question?
Yeah, if anybody wants a question, now is the time. Otherwise, I'm going to put this question, which Daniel, I did raise earlier, and I'm sorry, Dorothy couldn't join us, who is with the Red Cross, who was here earlier. But the question about scaling and versus local implementation. So the question of, in a polycrisis context, is scaling still relevant, or is learning from lived experience and application to relevant local context not more important? And so something like the Robo-Coastal Corridor, which is similar to the Whale Coast Coastal Corridor, or even potentially the coastal corridors that Marina, I know you had spoken about in California, are there not shared lessons that can be applied? And is that not not better, but maybe a more relevant form of scale in a context of a polycrisis? It's a small question.
I think Marina can answer better than I can.
I would say I really liked what Michael had written in the chat, and it made me think that I think the issue, whatever the issue is, would determine what is at scale versus at a local level. Like I mentioned, ocean acidification, that's clearly a ocean-wide problem, which can be managed at a local scale. And then I think this is where people's emotions come into it oftentimes, like to hold in your head that there is an absolute catastrophe happening in our world oceans. And then to think, okay, well, there are things that I can do to protect a small piece of it. That feels very tribal, and it feels very like, well, I can protect my own in some ways. And it's also, horrifying to try and hold in one's mind the global community of which we all belong and our global resources versus a smaller thing that I have control over. And then how do we balance that And how do we help others who may be living in a different environment? Like I live in California where people are very active on this issue. I have a state government that cares a lot about this. I have a state government that believes that climate change is happening. There are resources, right? There are a lot of ways that California can be a success story because we have so many resources in so many different ways that is not the reality for a lot of other places. So, how can I help and support my community? And then how can I help and support others who may be living in a different context? So I think that it's just such a complex issue to try and hold in one's mind. That is where I think a lot of people also get lost and get afraid and want to turn off because news headlines don't talk about what the local successes are. They usually lead with the like, oh my God, we're all going to die moment, as opposed to the this is what's possible here.
Yeah, I think I mean, I wasn't trying to say scare. I think both of them are critical, right? So the global work that Daniel, I was just picking up on Daniel saying he doesn't have a local picture, but actually he does. He just has it in that global context. So I was trying to get the interplay between those. But I think, Michael, your point on we don't care about ocean warming in Asheville actually was an interesting conversation we had last week, which was everybody should care about ocean warming, right? Because the reason we've got Helene or whatever is because of ocean warming. And so I think, and that's where I think the global and the local have to interface in our knowledge, because we have to see ourselves as one piece of the whole, right? Because these things are interconnected. I don't know, Michael, yes.
Well, that was one of the reasons why I asked about embedding human ecology awareness in every child's schooling. So one of the things we've invented in the last 100+ years is mass scale schooling. It's one of the biggest scale human things. Every day, 5 days a week, in every country, 80% of kids go to school. We have this giant socialization machine. What are they learning in there? Somehow it seems like recently they've been learning more about turbocharged greed, how to be successful conformist slaves to capitalism, get a job, as opposed to what are we here for and what keeps us safe and what is common. So Daniel's league table of the top line aggregate realities should be common knowledge for every child. Every child should be able to recite the oceans, temperatures, they're safe like this, but they've grown this much warmer recently in my 10-year lifetime. And that is causing havoc in a lot of coastal areas of the whole world. And then down below that, then what Marina was so articulate about was in localities, what kind of action does that trigger for kids in different niches of the ecosystem? Well, if you're in a fishing village in Maine, or if you're in a mountain redoubt in Asheville riddled by rivers, or if you're in the Himalaya in Nepal, or if you're, wherever, then you take that information, this urgency about human ecology being essential everyday practical knowledge and values, and you put it to work. And you do projects, you do experiential learning. So then we begin getting away from doubting that human-induced climate change is happening and doubting that, oh, that's not important to me, or why should I care about that? And we get more to kind of building, we have this turbocharged mechanism, mass education, and we're not using it to get ranks and generations of ordinary people saying, it's this common sense. You wake up in the morning, you sweep the leaves off your front porch, and you do something for human ecology because it makes your life safe and useful. And I just, this is where this relationship between, and the aggregate, Daniel's work helping us aggregate mass scale complicated information, and Marina's, into intelligible stories about facts that we then can interpret the local variants of. This seems like a really important basic function, a public good, and then a skill for ordinary human beings to be able to frame their understanding of living in the world in human ecological terms, and to not have it be some hippie idea, but actually a very practical, ordinary, functional, here's how to breathe, here's how to walk, and here's how to not screw up the nest, while you live in it, and how to live within limits in reasonable ways in pursuit of a good life, instead of greed driving everything, overdoing everything because we can, being a goal, being a value. And I just see this as this is something I'm thinking about a lot, is how do we urgently re-socialize all of us to, there's a wonderful school in Maine on Mount Desert Island, the national park there, called the College of the Atlantic. And it's a 50-year-old small liberal arts college. And the only degree you can get there is a degree in human ecology. Doesn't matter whether you study dance or literature or biology or anything else, your BA is in human ecology. Some crazy coots invented this school 50 years ago. Why isn't there 50 in every US state? Why aren't there thousands of them in Europe? Why aren't we planting seeds like that everywhere? And connect the dots of these things so that we're countering a kind of a lack of basic knowledge and shared values that could easily be nurtured in really good ways by very ordinary people, in their way of raising their children.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
Tamsin, we're headed, I think we're past the finish line. Shall we wrap up now? And Michael, I didn't know you were in Asheville, so you could have given us a firsthand viewpoint. But
Oh, I'm not. My son lived there for 4 or 5 years, and we have dear friends there, but I'm safely tucked away in Washington, D.C., where there are no environmental problems whatsoever.
Yeah, right. No problems. The other point that you made about greed resonates with me because the capitalism with no rules is just another way. It almost by definition has to destroy the earth, right? By just you mine something till there's nothing left. So I want to say thanks to everyone for joining us today. This has really, really been a great conversation. I really got a lot out of it. Marina, thank you for joining us and talking so eloquently about your great book, Atlas of Disappearing Places. And Daniel, thank you. We know you're busy and and then we're very happy that your camera worked. We like seeing you on camera. And so thank you for joining us. Really, really intriguing work and descriptions of how we got here, and a great history lesson. And then Lady Conningham, what a fantastic joy to be here with you, and thank you for all the incredible work you're doing, including bringing us together, but especially the work that you're doing around Plettenberg Bay. And then Tamsin, you pulled all the strings to make sure this would all work. And so we thank you for that. So all of you, thanks so much. Tamsin, why don't you give us a wrap up?
Great. Well, I'm going to thank you because you forgot to mention yourself that actually you are the centerpiece of all of these conversations and bringing Daniel and Hugo and Marina together. So I'm hugely grateful and very insightful. I thoroughly enjoyed all three of these conversations. I know that the New York and London videos weren't great, but I managed to get to at least listen and hear. And we will share this recording for those who would like to. We do have another conversation on Thursday, and I've put the details in the chat. But Lady Cunningham, Russell, Cecily, Ray, and to the team at Cheetah Plains who instigated this in the first instance, thank you. And we're delighted to have hosted this first conversation. Daniel, I'm so grateful. And Marina, it's been wonderful. And I can see how the connections between all of you. I see Daniel's already been brave enough to put his email address in the chat. And if anybody else wants any other email addresses, you can come to me.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It was
Thank you.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Adios.
Thank you.